Okay, today we're going to learn Yoma Daf Pebet. Okay, I hope you're feeling this, but the end sugyot of Yoma are amazing. They're sugyot that are very famous, by the way. They're very well-known sugyot. We're going to deal with all sorts of really interesting things today. Our first topic is children. When do they need to start fasting? And in fact, Shuli Mishkan wrote an article this week in Flashback all about Gil Chinuch and at what age children are supposed to do things and how it developed over time and how we think of 12 and 13 as the magic ages, but it wasn't the case, certainly not in the Gemara. If you remember from other sugyot we saw, this sugya specifically does seem to relate to the ages, but it's much more variety depending on what the issue is. That's first of all. The second topic is going to be, what do we do when somebody a pregnant woman has a craving on Yom Kippur, needs to eat, or she needs to eat non-kosher food. She has a craving, not in Yom Kippur, but in general for non-kosher food. What do we do? What about a sick person? That's really going to be tomorrow's topic, but it is going to be mentioned in our Mishnah. I mentioned at this point that on our site, there's a fabulous shiur by Dr. Ayelet Libson, who wrote a book about the topics of self-autonomy in the Talmud. And she talks about this sugya as one of the key sugyas where she builds a really interesting theory about self-autonomy. Her shiur is up on our site already. And there's actually a 3-part series she did. And one is relating to our sugya. And so recommended listening before, related to tomorrow's daf. Okay, with that, and within all that, again, I'm just giving you a bit of an overview of what's going to be. We're going to get to a main sugya, really, which belongs in Sanhedrin, about the 3 mitzvot of Yareg Ba'al Yavor that you have to basically get killed for and not, right? Normally we say Pikuach Nefesh overrides everything to save your life. But for these 3 things, if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, you must do this, you're not allowed to. So we're going to get to that today as well. So very interesting things. Let's get started. Hatinokot, and just to remind everybody, Siyum on July 11th. Actually, a little bit of an intro about this. We're doing the Siyum a little bit later, a few days after the Siyum. The Siyum will actually be on Thursday. That's when we finish, technically, but we're going to do the Siyum on Zoom on Sunday, because Sunday is just a better day. And I know it might not work for everybody, but for many people, it's a better day. So we pushed the Siyum off to Sunday, but I want to talk about the schedule just so nobody gets confused. On Thursday, in case you're not joining our Siyum, I'm going to already put up the daf. So if people want to finish the daf on time, that's important to you. So the daf will be up on Thursday morning and you can listen to the daf as usual. But if you're planning to come to the Siyum, don't listen because we're going to learn it together at the Siyum, both if you're going to one of the Siyums in Israel or if you're going to the Siyum on Zoom. But Friday, just so you don't get confused, Friday we're starting Sukkah. So even though we haven't done the Siyum until Sunday, Friday we're starting Sukkah. Shabbat there'll be a daf up with Sukkah, and Sunday morning there's a daf to learn for Sukkah. So that's just continuing as usual. We're just adding on the Siyum on Sunday, just so that be clear to everybody. Okay. And next week, one other change. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, there's no regular Zoom. I'll be away for a few days. All the shiurim will be up as usual. So they'll be up even earlier than usual. They'll be up by 6 a.m. Israel time. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you can learn with me, just not on Zoom. Okay, starting with our Mishnah. Hatinokot ein ma'aninotam b'yom kippurim. Children do not have to fast. Now, tinokot we normally think of as babies, but you're going to see it's clear here that tinokot is just a reference to children. Okay, we've seen them many times in the Gemara where they call children tinokot. Here they're going to even call 12-year-old children tinokot. So tinokot do not fast on Yom Kippur. Now, it happens there's an approach of Beit Shammai that you are supposed to have children fast. You're not supposed to give them food. And people went very out against him and said, what are you talking about? You're crazy. And this is Shammai Azaken, right? The Shammai that we have Beit Shammai from. Shammai himself thought that we should actually, all children even should fast. But our Mishnah clearly goes against this and says, no, they do not fast. Maybe that's why they have to say it, right? Because you would think it would be obvious, but not so obvious because some people thought they should. Now, before I translate this line, it's not an easy line to translate, even though it looks like a pretty simple line. I'm going to read you a line in the Meiri, and I brought it on the sheet. It's about 3/4 of the way down on the first side. V'suya shela upsa kayotze mimena mevubar biyad. I skipped on word biyad mifrashim. Okay, he says this is a very complicated sugya, and in fact, when I was preparing it, it took me a very long time because it's confusing what exactly this simple reading is, because There's many different interpretations, and there's a lot of lack of clarity here. Okay, so I'm going to explain it mostly through Rashi, although in one case I'll explain where the Meiri has a bit of a difference from Rashi. But the way Rashi understands our Mishnah, now I'll read the line according to Rashi, and I specifically say this because there's different ways to read this sugya, and it's confusing, and it's not clear cut, but I'm going to try to make it as clear cut as possible through using Rashi's interpretation and how he reads the sugya. But again, whenever you read an interpretation, it means there are others who read this differently. So if you read this without Rashi, I'll just kind of show you what's tricky. If you read this without Rashi, what would you say? A year or two before, you teach them, right? You do chinuch, which Rashi is going to explain, and all the Mepharshim really seem to think chinuch means, Rashi says, lisha'ot. Lisha'ot means to start learning how to fast. How do you learn how to fast? Well, you normally eat, right? We'll see this inside later. You normally eat at 9 o'clock in the morning. You eat at 10 o'clock in the morning instead. In other words, fast part of the day. Right? It reminds me of a story when I was growing up. My friend and I were fasting. We had agreed we were going to fast till 3 and meet up at my house and break our fast at 3. Still remember who this was. I was obviously very young at the time. And it was my very close friend at the time. And we made up to meet at my house. And I pushed myself because I knew that she was fasting and I was fasting. We were going to break our fast together at 3 o'clock. Of course, comes 3 o'clock and she shows up at my house and she had already broken her fast and I was devastated. But right, there's this idea that there's chinuch in fasting part of the day. That's part of learning how to fast. So now it says, the simple reading of this would be a year or two before you reach the age of mitzvot where you're obligated to fast. We teach you sha'ot. But that's not what Rashi, and then b'shvil shiur regilim b'mitzvot, right? That's din chinuch, so that you get used to mitzvot, so that when the time comes and you have to do it, you already have a sense of what's to be done. So Rashi says here, lifnei shana, and here he adds something that is not written in the simple reading of the Mishnah. Shehi smucha lepirkan. It's the year before the year that's before they become bat mitzvah. In other words, okay, well, we'll just talk bat mitzvah. Okay, we'll see the Gemara often is going to use the bat mitzvah as the example, even though they're going to bring both bar and bat, but often we'll just take the bat mitzvah example, and we're women, most of us. So we'll take the bat mitzvah example, 12. So what he says is the shana shnatayim is not 10 or 11, it's 9 or 10. It's a year or two before the year that's before your bat mitzvah. Okay, now why is he distinguishing? And why would we say this? So the Meiri says, and here I brought it on your sheet again, back to that Meiri. Now, there's the reason why it's samuch lepirkan. Pirkan means age of maturity. Samuch lepirkan is the year before the age of maturity. So what he's saying is shana shnatayim before the samuch and not before the pirkan. So he says, why does he say that? Because it's obvious. In other words, it's obvious to the person writing the Mishnah that the year before Bar, once you say that chinuch means sha'ot and not a full day of fasting, since it was obvious to them, now we'll see, it's kind of a strange thing to say it's obvious because we'll see there's a machloket about this. But the Meiri says it was obvious to them that a year before Bar or Bat Mitzvah, you have to fast on a rabbinic level. Okay? There's a halacha that from the rabbis said you have to fast a year before Bar Bat Mitzvah. Since that's the case, when it says din chinuch of sha'ot, it must have meant before that. And it was so obvious to them that they didn't need to say it. That's Rashi's reading. Okay, again, sometimes you say something's obvious because you're trying to convince someone because it's not necessarily so obvious. But that's what he claims. He claims, therefore, it's clearly talking about age 10 or 9 or 10 for bat mitzvah. And it means before 11, the year where you're already obligated rabbinically to fast. But as I said, we're going to see that that's a subject of debate. Okay? But once you understand the Mishnah in this way, you'll see why the Gemara later has a different way of, is going to struggle with one of the opinions because it's not going to match the way we just read the Mishnah. So Hashta, the first question is, Hashta bifnei shtayim mechanchim lehu, bifnei shana mebaya. We understand, and something doesn't make sense. Why would you say a year or two before? If I tell you you have to start fasting b'sha'ot at age 9, then obviously you have to fast b'sha'ot at age 10, right? If you have to fast and not eat, refrain from eating for a few hours at age 9, of course you have to do it at age 10. So why do you have to say 1 or 2 years at age 9 or at age 10? So, Amar Chisda, Lo kasha. I see all these questions going on in the chat about different minagim. We're going to see this all from the Gemara. So hold on. Amar Rav Chisda. Lo kasha ha bechole ha bebari. There's weak kids and there's strong kids. Here it doesn't necessarily mean healthy and sick. It means healthy, meaning very strong, and weaker, meaning very weak, right? We know there's kids who it's easy for them to fast and it's not easy for them to fast. So kids who it's easy for them to fast, and my kids all started at a young age, at about 10 to fast. Even my son, and I remember the first Yom Kippur fasted, and right after Yom Kippur vomited all over. It was quite unpleasant. Right? It was a little harder for him to fast. He managed to do it anyway, but it was quite unpleasant. But anyway, what happens here? So Rav Chisda says it all depends on the child. And this is really what it's all about when it comes to Gil Chinuch. You have to know, we know the famous line, Chanoch Lanar al Pi Darko, every child should be educated according to their level. Likewise here, you can't just say all kids have to fast at age 10, at age 11, at age 12, whatever it might be. It depends on the child and their ability. Therefore, Shanar Shnatayim, even Sha'ot. So the Shanar Shnatayim is giving you a range. It's saying, depending on what kind of child you have. If it's a child who can handle it, start them at Sha'ot at 9, right? At hours. Push off, right? Fast some of the day. If they're better, then do it at age 10. I'm sorry, opposite. If they're weaker, do it at age 10. If they're stronger, do it already at age 9. So that's Rav Chisda. Now we're going to have a machloket between Rav Huna and Rav Nachman on one side versus Rabbi Yochanan on the other, all about this issue. Are you obligated from the rabbis to fast a year or two before Yom Kippur? So Amar Rav Huna. Now first he's talking about a girl, even though he says ben, okay, ben chet or ben tet, okay, which really, it should read bat chet or bat tet. Ben chet u ben tet, okay, someone who's 8 or 9 years old. Mechanchino tol sha'ot should be taught to, right, at already age 8 or 9, you should already start fasting part of the day. Ben 10 or ben 11, 10 or 11, mashlimim midrabanan. Mashlimim means we complete the fast from the rabbis, okay, meaning obviously you don't have to fast on a D'Oraita level, on a Torah level until you reach the age of maturity. But, okay, and this is why it's clear from our sugya, the age of maturity is 12 for a girl. That's what they're talking about. So at age 10 or 11, she already needs to fast a full day on a rabbinic level. Then you'd bet, mashlimim midoraita. Once she's 12, then already on a Torah level, she has to fast. Bitinoket, and they tell you, by the way, here's where I told you, they mentioned a 12-year-old girl is a tinoket, right? They don't, tinoket, we generally means a baby. In Talmudic language, it doesn't mean a baby. It means a child. Okay, this is talking about a female child. Rav Nachman Amar, now he doesn't disagree. He's just telling you the flip side for the boy. Ben tet, ben yud. Okay, this is very simple math, right? Everything's pushed off a year. So at 9 or 10, mechanchino till the sha'ot. Right, so my son really didn't need to fast at age 10. Ben 11, ben 12, mashlimim midrabanan. But 11 or 12, you already have to do it on a rabbinic level. Ben yud gimel, mashlimim midoraita. Once you get to 13, then you have to fast a full day. Bitino, and this is all for a boy. Okay, so I put this all on the chart. What age one has to do what? Okay, we have, just to review, the Mishnah said age 9 and 10, we do sha'ot. 11 is the year before Bar Mitzvah or Bat Mitzvah, let's say, right? We're talking about girls. You're 11, you're 12, you'd have to fast. Rav Huna and Rav Nachman say 8 and 9 sha'ot, 10 and 11 fast, right? It doesn't seem to match our Mishnah. And then 12, obviously, like it matches our Mishnah at age 12, but age 11, right? And it doesn't exactly work in age 8, where they come with 8, the Mishnah only talked about 9 and 10. Again, if we read the Mishnah like Rashi did, which is that it means 9 and 10 before 11. Okay, Stacey, I don't have a good answer for you why it says ben if it means bat. Okay, I think just maybe they were used to using masculine language because we generally use it, and that's why. I don't really know otherwise, but it definitely means a girl because that's what it says there. So now they bring Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Hashlama de Rabbanan Leika. Says there's no such thing as fasting before you're 13 or 12. No, there is no rabbinic issue to fast. He thinks not. Ben Yud Aleph, mechanchino tol the sha'ot. So when do you do sha'ot? The 2 years before Bar Bat Mitzvah. So at age 10 and 11 on our chart, you do sha'ot. No D'Rabbanan issue of. Now this also goes against our Mishnah because our Mishnah said 9 or 10, and he says 10 or 11. So now they're going to say, Tanan. So wait a minute. Let's deal with, right? So, and then I think I didn't read this, but Ben, you bet Mashlamimi Doraita. I can't remember if I read that, but obviously at 12, you're going to fast on a Torah level. So now we're going to try to read our Mishnah according to each of these rabbis. Right? Always the Amoraim have to fit in with the Mishnah. They can't just go against the Mishnah unless they have some support for it otherwise. So sometimes we just have to do a creative reading of the Mishnah in order to make it work. Because right now we already saw none of them fit the Mishnah. So here goes. Tanan. Our Mishnah says, now remember, this means according to the way we read it, at age 9 or 10, you do sha'ot. At age 11, you fast. On the rabbinic level, at age 12, you fast on a Torah level. That disagrees. We're now going to focus on Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, who say 8 and 9 is sha'ot and not 10 and 11. And 10 and 11, I'm sorry, and not 9 and 10, and 10 and 11 is already fasting. So how do we resolve this? Well, they actually say bishlama. This actually makes sense. L'Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman. Why? L'fnei shana v'l'fnei shtayim. Okay, here gets the tricky line. I'm going to read it in two different ways. L'fnei shana l'divreihem v'l'fnei shtayim l'divrei Torah. Okay, I'm changing the words here based on the comments on the side and the way Rashi reads it. L'fnei shana l'fnei shtayim is not either 1 year before or 2 years before. It's actually the exact same year they're talking about. And what are they talking about? They're talking about only one situation, our Mishnah, which is a sick person. Okay, this is a little bit of a hard interpretation, but I'm going to tell it anyway because it's Rashi. Okay, meaning difficult in terms of to really say that's what the Mishnah is talking about. But we're going to say it's talking about a chole. Now, we said there's 2 years, according to them, of obligation to fast on a rabbinic level, but not if you're weaker, not if you're a cholah. So if you're weaker, what do? You really only fast 1 year by rabbinic standards, year 11. Year 10, you're going to do sha'ot. So even though they said it's 2 years of rabbinic fasting, that's only for someone who's strong. Someone who's weaker is not going to fast year 10. And what they basically say is the word l'fnei shana o shtayim doesn't mean what we thought it meant before, right? One for a sick person, one for a stronger person, but it means a year before. L'fnei shana means a year before the rabbinic obligation to fast, and l'fnei shnatayim is 2 years before the 2 years before the Torah obligation to fast. So I'm going to read it again inside. L'fnei shana l'divrei. We're talking about the same year, year 10. It's 1 year before the rabbinic prohibition, and it's l'fnei shtayim l'divrei Torah, and it's 2 years before the Torah prohibition. And then it turns out l'fnei shana l'fnei shtayim is number 1, only referring to someone who's weak. And it's only referring to one particular year. It's referring to year 10, and it's saying year 10, which can be looked at as a year before you really need to fast on a rabbinic level, or 2 years before you really need to fast on a Torah level. That's Rashi. The Meiri, by the way, I wrote this out on the sheet. The Meiri has a different interpretation. Okay, I'm in the first koshi on the sheet. I brought the Meiri here. The Meiri, I didn't bring his words, but I explained it here on the sheet, which is when it says he has the girsa, not Divrei Hen and Divrei Torah, he has the girsa that we have, which is a year before, right? A year l'divrei Hen and 2 years before l'divrei Hen. And what he said is it's talking about a bari and a chole. Now, what they're adding here is that even though Rav Huna and Rav Nachman basically said very simply, 8 and 9 is for sha'ot, 10 and 11 is already fast for the entire day. Even within that, there's a distinction whether you're healthy or strong, even though they didn't say so. So what does it mean? If we take these 4 years and we say 8 and 9 is sha'ot and 10 and 11 is fasting, well, not exactly. 11 is definitely fasting for everyone, but 10 is going to depend if you're strong or weak. 9 is sha'ot. So basically you could, let's just go through, if you're strong. If you're strong, you're going to have 8 and 9 sha'ot. Everyone's going to have 2 years of sha'ot. And then you're going to have 10 and 11 of fasting. But if you're weak, you're going to have 9 and 10 is sha'ot and only 11 is fasting. And we're only going to make you fast 1 year before if you're weaker. So the way the Meiri reads this is shana o shnatayim. The way he reads the Mishnah is the way we read it before, really, which is 1 or 2 years. This one I think is a better reading. 1 or 2 years before the rabbinic obligation, meaning, right? The rabbinic obligation for sure is 11. questionable whether it's 10, depending on whether you're choler or bari, right? Whether you're strong or not. So what it means is a year before the rabbinic of 11. So either you're going to start sha'ot at age 10, and you're going to do sha'ot at age 9 and 10, right? 2 years before, or 1 year before, right? You're going to, one second, right, right. You're going to, when are you going to start sha'ot? Either a year before or 2 years before, right? You're going to have, no, actually, one second. Shana lefnei hashlama midivrehem. Right, it's actually only really referring to Gil, to the ages of, it's basically saying 9 or 10. Okay, it doesn't really refer to age 8 because, one second, you'd have to say, right, this is about a bit of a weakness in the shita, that it means you're doing sha'ot at age 9 or 10. Okay, you're also maybe doing it at 8 or 9. That's a bit of a problem according to his interpretation. But okay, so it would be, right, 2 years before, but I guess, yeah, I'm trying to think, there's something for him. Second. Okay, I have to look at the Meiri again, but it basically means that we're doing a different thing. The Shana Shnatayim is relating specifically to the Sha'ot compared to the Durabanan and when you have to do Ashlama. Okay, there's a bit of an issue because it's actually 2 years before, according to everybody, you have 2 years of doing it, but I guess it means, you know, how we relate to this year 9 or 10 is 10 going to be, for the idea being that 10 is going to be for some people a fast and for some people it's going to be just sha'ot. Okay, so in any case, it's complicated how to read this, but that's how we, but for whatever reason, the Gemara thinks that this actually works simply, even though it's not so simple. Ella, Rabbi Yochanan kasha. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, the Mishnah makes no sense because again, assuming Rashi said Shana Oshtayim is a year or two before the year that you have to fast in the rabbinic level, meaning it's before year 11. So it's either 9 or 10. Now, what did Rabbi Yochanan say? There is no fasting on a rabbinic level. It's all 10 or 11 is sha'ot. There's no fasting when you're a child. So how does he make sense? So the Mishnah doesn't make any sense. So the Mishnah makes sense if we don't understand it. We're going to explain it. It's actually, his answer is much simpler. Amar l'cha Rabbi Yochanan, ma shana u'shtayim samuch lepirkan. It's the year or two before 12. And then it's simple. It's not saying the year or two before, what we thought was a complicated reading anyway. A year or two before, there's a rabbinic obligation to fast. It's a year or two before you turn 12, before you're obligated to fast. And then it fits in perfectly with Rabbi Yochanan. The years of chinuch for sha'ot that you need are 10 and 11, right before you get to 12. And that's how we read it, not this way we assumed Rashi meant. And then, then you have to question how the Meiri said it was so obvious to them that everybody thinks you have to fast the year 11. Right, clearly Rabbi Yochanan didn't think that, and clearly he read the Mishnah different. Tashma. So now we're going to have another question on all this. So what we did so far was we questioned why a year or two, it doesn't make sense, and then we explained there's a distinction, sick and healthy. Then we get to the Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, and then Rabbi Yochanan, who each disagree about whether there's a rabbinic obligation to fast or not. It doesn't seem like I just saw your question. It doesn't seem like Rabbi Yochanan thinks that there's a distinction between a bari and a choled. Everyone agrees there's 2 years of sha'ot. You have to have 2 years of fasting part of the day. He doesn't really have to worry about a bari or choled because bari or choled has to do with more so with a little bit with healthy and not, but more so with fasting the entire day. So, and I think it was a concern if you take a weak child and you have the fast, they might get sick, like my son did. So anyway. That's the issue of, so we took their opinions, we showed their 2 opinions, and then we tried to reread the Mishnah according to each of the opinions and figure out how they fit in with the words. But now we're going to bring another issue. Tashma, the Tani Rabba Bar Shmuel, Tinokot Ema Ninot Yoma Kippurim. So in this bride that Rabba Bar Shmuel brings, it says here, just like our Mishnah, we don't have children fast. Aval Mechanchino Tan Sha'au Shaim Samuch Lepirkan. But we teach them, right? Which again, what does teaching mean? Teaching means we do sha'ot. That's how we've been understanding teaching, chinuch. A year or two before pirkan, meaning a year or two before their bar mitzvah. So this obviously works very well according to Rabbi Yochanan. The Rabbi Yochanan. What's here that's not in our Mishnah? Our Mishnah just said lifnei shana, lifnei shnatayim. But this says samuch lepirkan, just before they become bar mitzvah. Those words were missing in our Mishnah. But here it's very clear. So it works perfectly according to Rabbi Yochanan. But it doesn't work according to them. So when it says chinuch a year or two before your bar mitzvah, what did Rav Nachman and Rav Chisda say? Rav Nachman and Rav Huna. You need to fast the 2 years before your bar mitzvah, a year or two before, depending on whether you're healthy or not, strong or not. So what do we say? Oh, they just meant chinuch meant fasting. You fast. What does it mean you fast on a rabbinic level? You fast on a rabbinic level because you need to learn how to fast. So you practice fasting, right? That's what we always did in our house. Right? You want the kids to learn how to fast. So you do it before you're actually obligated to make sure you know how to do it properly. And then when it comes time that you're really obligated, you'll know how to do it. So that's what chinuch means. So the Gemara now asks, do you really use chinuch the word chinuch usually means we train you. Train you means, like training wheels on a bike. We get you ready, but not yet actually do the actual thing. And why do we think the chinuch doesn't mean fasting all day? The Hatanya is chinuch. There's a brayta that says, what is chinuch when it comes to fasting? You normally ate 2 hours into the day. So you push off breakfast by an hour. The shalosh, if you were used to 3 hours, you push them up another hour. So that's chinuch. It's not fasting all day. He answers the obvious answer, which is trei chinuch. Just because this brayta calls that chinuch, it doesn't mean there's another term chinuch when it comes to fasting, and that means teach your children how to fast by actually having them fast all day. So we don't have a problem with that. That second source, which seemed to not really work with the other opinion of Rav Nachman and Rav Huna, actually does, because we could say they're actually referring to the 2 years before bar mitzvah when you actually have to fast. Okay, new Mishnah. That's the end of that topic. Again, there's a lot more that can be said here, but we're going to move on. If you have a woman, a pregnant woman, who has a craving and needs to eat on Yom Kippur, what do? We feed her until she starts coming back to herself. Okay, there was this assumption, right? I don't know. I didn't have any cravings that I felt like I was going to almost die if I didn't, or endanger my life, but they viewed it as dangerous. You have to remember also that many women, right, died in childbirth. There were many miscarriages, many more than nowadays. Nowadays, unfortunately, there are also many miscarriages, but those days, with medicine being what it was much more common. And you could see that there was this fear of pregnant women. Right? Even nowadays, right? People are always a little nervous when they're pregnant, on edge, worried about things. So you could see where they're coming from. There's a very interesting debate here, which is about whether it's the health of the woman that we're concerned about or the health of the fetus. So the Bahag, the Baal Alachot Gedolot, who's from the time of the Geonim, he says it's the fetus that we're worried about. We're worried about the health of the fetus, which is fascinating because this whole sugya in Sanhedrin is actually connected to certain things we're going to learn today, about the Rodef and whether the mother's life is in danger because of the fetus. Can you abort? It's all different questions about this. And they don't really view the fetus as a live being until it's born. There's a whole debate about at what point it becomes. Anyway, we'll see sugyot about this further on. You can keep this in mind because the Bahag actually says we're worried about the life of the fetus, and for that we allow her to eat, which is very interesting. Again, maybe there it's an issue of one life versus the other one's life, and then you have to weigh the value of life, which is another topic we're going to get into today in a different context. But anyway, he says it's the life of the fetus. Here, it's not like, well, we have to say which one are we choosing. So maybe that's why we still view the fetus as obviously very important. The Ramban says is we're worried about her life. It's her life that's in danger, and that's why we allow her to eat. So it's an interesting debate. A sick person we feed based on the assessment of an expert. We'll talk about this a lot more tomorrow. And there's a good shiur up on our site now by Dr. Ayelet Lipson, who has a book about self-autonomy in the time of the rabbis. And she talks about this sugya is a very important sugya in that. We actually put up a 3-part series of hers on the site. The first part of the series is about this sugya. The im ein sham b'ki'im, we're going to see in the Gemara, there's a few different opinions about this. And how to understand this line is very complicated. So I'm going to leave it all to tomorrow's shiur, which is an ein sham b'ki'im. If there aren't any experts, the simple reading sounds like you don't have any experts in the area who can assess whether the sick person needs to eat or not, then we feed that person until the person says, You can say yourself, I need food. And until you say, okay, you've eaten enough, we trust you. Sounds like, according to the Mishnah, we only trust you if there's no Beki'in. What exactly this means and the different opinions we're going to see about this, and not everyone seems to agree with what the Mishnah says, or again, we'll have to try to reconcile the other opinions with the Mishnah, just like we did today. That's going to all be in tomorrow's step. Tanu Rabbanan. So the Gemara starts off with another case of Ubarashi Elicha, not on Yom Kippur, but as I mentioned before, she's on a regular day, but she has a craving for non-kosher meat or meat she can't eat, which is Ubarashi Elicha Basar Kodesh. She has this craving for sacrificial meat. Obasar Chazir, or pork. Okay, she has a craving for non-kosher food. I see, Becky, you're asking about shiurim. Thank you for reminding me. I wanted to bring this up. It doesn't talk anywhere in the sugya about eating b'shiurim. Okay, normally nowadays people are recommended, depending on the situation. Sometimes you should eat b'shiurim, which means eat less than the requisite amount in more than 9 minutes. This relates to the sugya we saw before about the whole thing of the timing. And, pras and all that, the shirim of the kotevet. But what's interesting about this whole thing is that it doesn't really talk about it. And the Shulchan Aruch paskins that you have to eat b'shiurim. Okay, it doesn't talk about it in the sugya and also in tomorrow with the sick person. And there's a debate about, like Reb Chaim Mibris, I'll talk about this in tomorrow's class, about how he says that shiurim are only if it's a cholesh she'ein bo sakana. Once you get into the world of the realm of dangerous, just eat normally. We don't have this issue of shiurim. And where to draw the line is a big question. Like, where do you draw the line? Maybe you could say very easily, okay, that's the line. But obviously, who's to say whether you're in danger or not? That's obviously a very tricky line to know where to draw that line. So it's a big debate in general about when we do shiurim and when we don't. It's not a clear-cut issue, and it doesn't even appear in the sugya. So just so you should know. It seems here like we're talking about feeding people normally and not the shiurim. So now we have an Ubarashi Richa, she has a craving for non-kosher meat or meat she can't eat. You take like a straw type thing, you fill it with the gravy, and she sucks on it a little bit. And we don't want her to really eat it. Certainly not the meat, just the gravy. We give her a little bit of a taste and hope that that will be sufficient. So if she's good with that, amazing. If not, then we give her the gravy itself. It's still not the meat, but we give her the gravy. So if that worked, amazing. Then you can already feed her the fat from the meat. But then it's already okay. It seems like even to eat the meat itself. Because nothing stands in the way of saving a life. They clearly saw this as sakanat nefashot, okay? As life endangered situation. We're allowed to feed her. And now, what's interesting here is we do try other means. It's not like we say right away, feed her, but, and this is also a question always, how do we balance? How do we balance, on the one hand, if we say, pikuach nefesh, there's all these criteria and try this, try that, you might end up, someone might be too late by the time they actually eat. On the other hand, you have to balance that with, well, maybe you should try alternatives first. So now I kind of ended in mid-sentence, and this second part of the sentence is very critical sentence. Let's go back to the beginning. Nothing stands in the way of someone's life, except for 3 things. Avodah zarah, idol worship, hilo erayot, having sexual relations with people that are forbidden to have sexual relations with them, ushfichut damim, and murder. These are things that if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, I will kill you unless you do the following things, you are not allowed to do them. So now the Gemara wants to know, what's the source for the 3? Avodah zarah minal, and then this sugya appears also in Sanhedrin. There it's much more in-depth. Maybe we'll wait till there to get more in-depth about it, although we'll go a little bit in-depth today. It's one of these very, very famous sugyot. Ditanya, there's actually a few more exceptions. If it's shot malchut, the gzeirat malchut, they want to make you do it to show you're going against religion, all sorts of things. But anyway, we'll get to that when we get there. But it's mainly these 3 mitzvot. So, Ditanya, Rabbi Lezer Omer, Im ne'amar b'chol nafshecha, lama ne'amar b'chol ma'odecha. Famous pasuk from Shema, you should love God, v'ahavta et Hashem Elokecha, b'chol levavcha, b'chol nafshecha, b'chol ma'odecha. Your heart, with your soul, with your money. Im ne'amar b'chol ma'odecha, if it says with all your money, if it says b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul, which means your life, what do you need and all your money? And if you say with all your money, why do you need with all your soul? So the answer, different people, different strokes, just like we saw with the children, they're strong and healthy. There's some people who value their money more, and there's some people who value their life more. So his money is more important. If you value your money more than your life, or you value your life more than your money. Unfortunately, we know people who might value their money more than their lives, right? I saw a commentary in the Quran that maybe it's not like, oh, someone who's so obsessive about their money, but an old elderly person whose life maybe isn't worth so much, but if he doesn't have money, he's not going to be able to survive, and then his money becomes very important in his life because he doesn't have so much and he can't work for the money. So maybe then that maybe is a better example. So now that's all to teach you, really, it doesn't matter life, money, but the point is, right, that drasha is a little less significant. The point is that with all your life means give your life up to worship God as opposed to worshiping idols. That's saying love God, worship God as opposed to worshiping idols. So you can't worship idols, right? If someone tells you, I will kill you unless you worship idols, you're not allowed to do that. You have to basically leave yourself to be killed. Next one. So they're going to ask about both because one is going to be learned from the other, and then we're going to have to figure out, well, where do we learn the first one from? Rabbi Yoma. It's actually about Naram Urasa, which is a man who basically rapes a woman who is betrothed to somebody else. And it says, she screamed, and nobody came to save her. And then it says, just like somebody goes to kill somebody else, this is like that. It's basically saying rape is like murder. It's a very interesting line. So they want to understand, what does that mean? So, right, in my mind, I remember my high school teacher teaching me always, rape is a crime of violence, right? It's not a crime of sex, it's a crime of violence. And maybe it's almost, right, you could almost say that's what the Torah is saying when it says it. It's not the way the Gemara understands it. The Gemara tries to understand this pasuk. What did we learn from murder, Naram Urasa? We don't really learn anything. All the laws of Naram Urasa are written right there. So, Ella, right, you might say, oh, you get the death penalty, but we already know that because it says it in the Pesukim. So, it's one of these cases where it comes to teach, and it turns out instead of going in this direction, we're going in that direction. Instead of saying we're going to learn from murder to the case of Naram Urasa, we're going to do it the reverse. We're going to learn from Naram Urasa to the case of murder. What are we going to learn? You can save her with his life, meaning this is what we call din rodef, right? This is the whole thing that came up with the assassination of Rabin. Right? People viewed him as a rodef and therefore said it was okay to kill him. Right? I'm not just justifying it. I'm saying what halachic basis they were saying. So I don't agree with that. But just like if somebody is pursuing this Naram Urasa, you're allowed to kill him. How do we know that? Because it says, Ein Moshiala. If nobody saved her, which sounds like if someone could have saved her, they were allowed to. And they could actually kill the person. So if that's the case, you can save her by killing him. There's a whole debate there. Who we're saving? Are we saving him from the terrible act he's about to do? Or are we saving her from his pursuit? There's a debate about that. This one says Nitam Latzila, which means we're saving her. Some people say we're actually saving him from doing the sin. We're trying to save someone from doing something horrible. So likewise, a rotzeach, one can, if someone's about to murder someone else, you're allowed to kill him. But additionally, we're also going to learn the reverse. That didn't have to do with our topic today. But once we learn in that direction, then we're going to learn something else from rotzeach to naram urasa, which is just like in murder. If someone says, go kill someone, or I'll kill you, you're not allowed to. Likewise, naram urasa yareg va'al yavur. This is an interesting question. Who's getting the gun put at their head? The woman, right? That you should let yourself be raped rather than you should let yourself be killed rather than get raped. You have the choice. Or they say you should let yourself be killed rather than do the act, being the man. Now, if someone says, rape this naram urasa or else I'll kill you, then you basically have to get killed and not engage in that act. Now, Tosfot says it's obvious it's fine to the man and not the woman. And then he brings in the proof of Esther. Esther slept with Achashverosh. How could she have done that? And they say, it depends whether you say it's Gilor or not. Anyway, whole question. a very famous line of Tosfot, Esther Karka Olam Haita, which is that women are passive in the act of sexual relations. And based on that, he says she can actually let herself get raped rather than killed because she's passive. She's not actually actively doing anything. It's a whole interesting conversation in and of itself. I'm going to just put that out there and I'm going to move on. But that's a whole thing. And you can see, by the way, there's an incredibly long Tosfot. So if you just turn to the second side, which is what we're up to right now, we're going to see that there's a huge long Tosfot that starts on the page 4 about this topic in general, the Karka Olam and other issues come up. It's fascinating. If you have time on Shabbat to read up about all different things about this, I recommend it. There's a lot to be said about these sugyas in general. Okay, so what have we done so far? We've proven Avodah Zarah, we've proven Giloy Arayot because we learned it from Rotzeach. Now, how do we know Rotzeach though? We didn't, as we said, it's known that Rotzeach, you have to give yourself over to be killed and not kill someone else if someone puts a gun to your head. So now we have to say Rotzeach Gufei Minalim. Where do we learn that from? So the other two were Braitot, and we learned those Braitot were based on verses in the Torah. This is simple Sfarahi. It's just logic. What's the logic? They bring us a story of someone who came in front of Rava and said, Amar Le, Amali Mari Durai, the head of the city or some sort of officer, obviously not a Jewish officer or seemingly not, says to me, if he says to me, Kale Laplanya, he told me, go kill someone, V'ilo Katil Nalach, and if not, I will kill you. Amar Le, right, what do I do? Amar Le, Rava says to him, Nit Kale Felot, you should get murdered and not kill someone else. Why? Very famous line. My chazik dedamet didach sumak tfei. Who's to say your blood is any redder? Domadamedahu gabra sumak tfei. You can't play the values game and decide my life is more important than his life, right? Obviously, from here you get into the questions of you're in a desert, right? You're in the desert. There's only one jug of water. Who gets the jug, right? Same kind of question, right? Who are you to say that? Right? It's a little different. All these sugyas, when you learn these in depth, you start comparing all these sugyas and try to figure out what are all the different, parameters, different cases. What if you say, who's to say whose life is more valuable? What if they say, kill you, we're going to kill 10 of you unless you kill one person? Then maybe, right, it's 10 lives versus one life, but you're allowed to choose then. So it sort of depends on how you understand this. The Koran wrote it nicely in a footnote that there's two basic approaches to how to understand this. One is, can one life supersede another? And then it would merely be a numbers game. Maybe two lives would supersede another. And then there's a famous story in the Navi where it comes up where they said we're going to kill the city unless you give us this person, and the whole story there. Anyway, I'm not going to get into all the details. Maybe when we get to Sanhedrin, it's a little bit more in depth there. We'll talk about it then. The other option is to say, this is all based, normally we allow you to do something, an avera like this, if someone's going to kill you, because it's pikuach nefesh, saving a life. In this case, it's saving a life to kill a life, so you're not actually saving a life. Right, and maybe it's not pikuach nefesh at that point because, right, in the end, someone's life is being spared, is being killed, is not being spared. So anyway, different ways of understanding it. Like I said, lots more to be said here, but we're going to move on. Last part of today's talk, we're now going to have two stories about a nubarashi richa, which seems like the Mishnah said very much you start feeding her, but now we're going to see not exactly. Try something else instead. There was a woman who had this craving, a pregnant woman. They came before Rebbe Amarlu. Zilu lechushula. The Yoma de Kippurahu. Go whisper in her ear that it's Yom Kippur. Maybe that'll get her over the craving. Okay. Some people say, why whisper in her ear? Maybe they wanted the fetus to hear. Okay. And again, this idea the fetus is a live being and maybe you could hear and understand, and you're going to see what motivated them because of the continuation of the story. So what happened? Lechushula ve'ilchisha. It worked. She said, I'm okay. Kare ale b'terem etzarcha bebetin yidaticha. By the way, it also shows this idea that they didn't understand pregnancy so well. Like when you had the craving, did they see it as the mother's craving or the child's craving? Right? They didn't have a good understanding of what's causing this craving exactly. So they said about this fetus, this is what they said about Yirmiyahu. Before you even were created, right? I knew when you were in utero that you were something special. So that's what they said about this fetus, because the fetus, again, if you say specifically the fetus that had this chuyot, it heard and it stopped asking. And even if you say it's the woman, thank you, Gita, for pointing out this week's Haftorah. Even if you had the woman, the woman still, there's something special about what's in her womb. Nafik minei Rabbi Yochanan. And it was Rabbi Yochanan, in fact, who was born from this story. Second story, not as good a story. They came before Rabbi Chanina. They whispered to her, it's Yom Kippur, and they hoped it was going to help, but it didn't work. Kare Ale said about him, about this fetus, Zol Rishaim Merechem. Right? Woe is to the Rishaim that are already in utero, right? They're already from the Rechem. This is like, obviously they're not, but it's a way of saying you're so evil that even in utero you were evil. Nafik Minei Shabtai Atzer Peri. So out came Shabtai, who was Atzer Peri. Okay, good question. What is Atzer Peri and what makes this person so evil? Well, it's not exactly the most evil person, but what does he do? Rashi says, Lafkia Sha'arim. Okay, the Tanya Enotrim Perop Eretz Israel. What does this mean? He would put a lot of fruits in storage. That would mean there were less fruits in the shuk once there's less supply, right? And there's demand. The prices are going to be jacked up. And he's an evil person because he caused the prices to all go up and caused basically other people to end up having to pay a lot of money. And that's what was bad about him. Okay, he was a bad guy. Tov. That's it for today. I want to just point out one thing. I realized that when I read the story at the end of yesterday's stuff, we end with all these interesting stories at the end of our dapim these days. So when they were drinking the vinegar, in the end I said, he complained that they diluted it. I forgot to say in the beginning when it said mazgu v'shatu chala, they diluted the vinegar and then drank it. In other words, which in the end they were basically drinking water with a little vinegar in it, right? And that's what was so crazy about what they did. That they were, they tried to mask it. And, now we can drink water because if we said vinegar, well, let's just put some vinegar in our water and then we can drink it. And that's why it was also so crazy what they did. They all started drinking it. I forgot to mention that point in the story. It was a very important point to understanding it properly. Okay, have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I hope you find some time to read up on some things relating to today's stuff and also tomorrow's, which is a really interesting one. Shabbat Shalom.